Imagine going to bed healthy and waking up dying. In the middle of the 14th century, this wasn't a nightmare. It was reality. A fever would strike without warning. Dark, painful swellings would appear under the arms and along the neck. Within days, sometimes hours, entire families were gone. Church bells rang so often that cities stopped counting the dead. Graveyards overflowed. Streets fell silent. And across Europe, a single terrifying question echoed everywhere. Was this the end of the world? What people didn't know was that they were witnessing the deadliest pandemic in recorded human history. It would kill up to half of Europe's population and permanently reshape civilization. This was the Black Death. And once it began, there was no escape. To understand the devastation, we have to understand the height from which humanity fell. The early 14th century wasn't dark and stagnant. It was the peak of the High Middle Ages, a time of stability, growth, and connection. Thanks to a warm climate, harvests were plentiful. The population of Europe had nearly doubled. Cities like Paris, Florence, and London were bursting with life. The world felt connected. A merchant in Venice could buy silk that traveled the entire length of Asia, thanks to trade networks secured by the Mongol Empire. It was a glorious, optimistic world. But that very interconnectedness was a double-edged sword. The same ships that brought wealth were about to deliver the greatest catastrophe in history. The apocalypse began thousands of miles away on the vast steppes of Central Asia. Here, an ancient bacterium, Yersinia pestis, had lived for centuries in burrowing rodents like marmots. But around the 1330s, climate change disrupted this balance. Hungry, infected rodents moved closer to human settlements and the Silk Road. The jump from animal to human was made. The first victims, traders along the route, developed high fevers and the terrifying, painful swellings, the buboes that gave the plague its name. By the early 1340s, fragmented reports of a great pestilence in the east began to reach Europe. Merchants told tales of entire civilizations vanishing, but Europeans saw these as distant tragedies. They didn't understand germ theory. They didn't realize the executioner was traveling the same road as their spices. The tipping point was the city of Caffa, a wealthy Genoese trading colony on the Crimean Peninsula. In 1346, the Mongol army of the Golden Horde besieged the city. But the plague, which had traveled with the army from the east, began to tear through the Mongol camps. Facing defeat, the Mongol leader, Johnny Beg, made a horrific decision. He ordered the corpses of his plague-ridden soldiers to be loaded onto catapults. For days, the sky over Caffa rained dead bodies. The psychological terror was immense, but the biological impact was devastating. The unbreakable fortress had been breached from within. Panic gripped the city. Wealthy Genoese merchants fled for their lives, boarding 12 galleys and sailing for home. They didn't know they were carrying unseen stowaways, rats and their deadly fleas. These ships became floating vectors of death. The first major European port to fall was Messina in Sicily. When the ships arrived, the locals were met with a scene from hell. Most sailors were already dead. The few survivors were delirious, covered in black boils. The authorities ordered the ships away, but it was too late. The rats had already scurried ashore. Messina became the blueprint for disaster. The city's dense quarters were a perfect breeding ground for the disease. The social fabric disintegrated as people fled, spreading the plague further into the countryside. By early 1348, the great ports of Genoa and Venice were crumbling. Venice, ever pragmatic, developed the concept of the quarantine forcing arriving ships to wait 40 days or 40 giorni before entry. It was a pioneering public health measure, but it was too little, too late. The canals of Venice were soon filled with funeral barges. From the ports, the plague moved inland, following trade routes and rivers into the heart of Europe. Cities like Florence and Paris were vibrant, but they were also incredibly unsanitary, with narrow streets and open sewers. They were tinderboxes waiting for a spark. When the plague hit a city, it didn't just kill people. It killed the city itself. The best doctors of the age were helpless. They believed the air itself was corrupted, miasma, and their cures were useless, sometimes even harmful. They advised against bathing, burned aromatic woods, and bled patients who were already weak. The realization that their knowledge was powerless created a profound psychological crisis. The writer Giovanni Boccaccio described the total collapse of society in Florence. The fear of contagion was so great that it broke the most sacred human bonds. Fathers abandoned sons. Wives left husbands to die alone. The dead piled up in the streets faster than they could be buried, leading to the digging of massive plague pits, where bodies were stacked like firewood. For the people of the 14th century, an event of this scale could only be divine punishment. People flocked to churches praying for deliverance, but this only spread the disease faster. When prayers failed, a desperate radical piety took hold. The flagellant movement swept across Europe. Bands of men marched from town to town, whipping themselves in public squares, hoping to take the world's sins onto their own flesh to appease God. But as the death toll mounted, the need for a human scapegoat grew darker. A horrific conspiracy theory spread that Jewish communities were poisoning the wells. Despite the Pope pointing out that Jewish people were dying at the same rate, mob violence erupted. Entire communities in cities like Strasbourg and Mainz were rounded up and burned alive. The Black Death unleashed not just biological horror, but the very worst of human nature. The plague wasn't just an urban event. It crept into the countryside, carried by refugees. Thousands of villages were wiped out completely. Harvest rotted in the fields because there was no one left to bring them in. Farm animals wandered wild as the carefully managed medieval landscape began to return to wilderness. By 1351, the first wave of the Black Death began to burn itself out. The bacteria had simply run out of easy victims. Survivors stepped out into a silent, transformed world. As much as half of Europe's population, perhaps 50 million people, were gone. In the aftermath, something remarkable happened. The massive loss of life created a severe labor shortage. For the first time in centuries, peasants held the power. Landlords, desperate for workers, had to offer higher wages and better conditions. The rigid system of serfdom began to crack. A golden age of the laborer was born from the ashes. But the psychological scars ran deep. Art became obsessed with death. The danse macabre, or dance of death, became a common theme, showing skeletons leading kings and peasants alike to the grave, a stark reminder that death was the great equalizer. The Black Death was the greatest trauma Western civilization ever endured. It shattered the optimism of the Middle Ages and laid bare the fragility of human society. The world that rebuilt itself was more cynical and more questioning, and it cleared the ground for the slow emergence of the modern world. For centuries, we've seen the Black Death as a distant medieval nightmare. But empty streets, locked homes, fear of the very air we breathe. Does that really sound like ancient history? Or does it feel uncomfortably familiar? The plague was a test of civilization, and tests have a way of repeating. I'm Tim, watching the past so we can understand the present. Together we keep history reborn. I'll see you in the next era.